The future.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I know, it's a difficult question, Jeremy. I've heard
What
that
about the
a lot.
future? What do you reckon?
I think there's hope.
I think it could go either way.
We're here in Islington to talk to Jeremy Corbyn. It's a difficult time at the moment. This man used to lead the Labour Party, now he's in your party. And in many ways, some people are wondering what's going on. Because when we say yours, we often talk about a bygone age, public services, strikes and international conflict. And some say that that's the past, but it's also the present and maybe the future too. So we're going to explore a lot of issues, asking him how he thinks about today, how he thinks about some of the past, and what he thinks about tomorrow. But stay tuned.
Do you want to do it somewhere around here?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Jeremy. How are you?
Great, lovely to be here. We're on the 6 acres estate in Islington North. Is there a better place to be?
We'll have to find out. I think Manchester has its own equivalent to this.
Manchester, are you saying Manchester's better than North London?
For political reasons, I just leave that to the side. But,
Is it serious? Okay.
to start with, I think, one of the key issues that almost everybody's speaking about, politically or otherwise, is the cost of living. People look at how, chocolate bars have gone up in price, but the size has shrunk, or they speak about the increase in the, rents. And I wondered, from your perspective, what do you see as one of the key antidotes to that issue?
Well, food prices are definitely rising all the way through. Fuel prices are rising, but they've only been rising since there's been a big increase in the cost of living crisis, so they're not the sole cause of it, although obviously that will be a contributory factor. And a lot of families are absolutely up against it now, and the food banks around here busier than ever and having now difficulty meeting the demand, whereas 6 months and a year ago they had plenty of stock, and now they are running out of stock because there's people not donating enough, and the supermarkets are they still give, but they don't give as much as they used to. So there's big issues. Now, how do we deal with it? Well, one is obviously increase benefit payments would be a big step forward. Increasing in minimum living wage would help a lot. But also you've got to look at the question of the profiteering that's been made out of food supply, because you mentioned something that's happening, which is actually very subtle but quite clever, where the manufacturers either reduce the quantity in a packet and charge the same price, or it just bluntly increase the price. So you see things that used to be sold in 1 kilo packs, now you find, if you look at them very closely, they're 800 grams and things like that. And charge it. They say the price is the same. Well, it is, but it's actually a 20% increase.
Thinking about that, one of the other issues that's linked to local politics is, of course, international politics.
But can we go back on the food price? I see in Scotland, the idea being put forward of price controls on food, basic items, absolutely ridiculed by an awful lot of the commentariat and so on. But in reality, when the 1970s Labour government was battling with massive inflation was at one stage running at 24% for a while, eventually came down, and the government did that by a combination of things, one of which was controlling food prices for a basic basket of food items. And that made a difference. Bread, flour, sugar, etc. And that helped to reduce the level of inflation. Now, I think the fact that it's even being debated is quite a good thing.
I hear that. I think when we think about things like, the 1970s actually, and considering yourself having a long history in political struggle, the 70s saw, the OPEC oil embargo, it saw rising inflation globally, and it also saw, if you like, international conflict, especially in Asia at the time. And of course, now we've seen the US and the Israeli government launch a war of aggression on Iran, and that is part of why we're seeing increased prices here on the street. In the UK in particular, there's many different views from many different people about those kinds of issues. People who, for example, do not like, say, the Iranian government's human rights record, but at the same time, people who see, a greater Israel projects being expounded by the likes of Bezalel Smotrich, the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir, and they're concerned when they see Starmer, perhaps advance some sort of non-interventionist rhetoric, but at the same time enabling, Fair Forward and other UK bases to be used in the delivery of arms to the US to carry out its strikes. It's a very complicated issue, but I wondered how you felt about it and how you thought about it, especially in terms of how it impacts on people more broadly, with the UN saying it could increase poverty for 32 million people.
Well, it's the opposite of non-intervention, Starmer's approach, and what he's done is supported Israel throughout all this conflict, including supply of arms, parts, weapons, etc., and surveillance flights and sharing information and so on. Israel and the US then start bombing Iran. To begin with, he was politically supportive of it, then backed off a bit, is then challenged on the use of RAF Fairford particularly, and Bryce Norton and Diego Garcia. And then in doing that, he then announces that what he wants to do is only support them if they're making defensive operations and defensive flights. Well, for people who are in Iran and being bombed, a defensive flight is exactly the same as an aggressive flight. You are being bombed. And so when the analysis is written up of the whole conflict in Iran, Britain occasioned the bombing, shall we say, and that's what's going on. How do people feel about it, and what's the effect of this? Well, the effect of the blocking the Strait of Hormuz by a combination of Iran and the US means that oil, some is getting through, some is not. Some ships are being impounded, some are not. So it's a kind of long, there's a very confused picture there. But the other side of it is the question about how is this actually international waters when it's not, because Iran and the USA have never signed up to international maritime treaties, either of them. So neither are in breach, but both are in breach in a way in that they are stopping other people going through. Oman, on the other side, is part of those treaties, and so it's a very confusing situation. In reality, there has to be a deal done between Iran and the USA, and I say well done Pakistan for getting involved, and well done Pakistan for trying. But it's also very unclear what the US actually wants, because they say that Iran was enriching uranium. Yes, they have been enriching uranium. They say it is for a nuclear power program. Now, hand on heart, I do not agree with the nuclear power program. I am not a supporter of nuclear power, but nevertheless, that's the argument Iran are putting forward. And then you balance that with the previous Ayatollah saying they will never develop nuclear weapons because he does not believe the tenets of Islam allow for the development of a weapon of mass destruction. So exactly what deal or agreement can be done, I don't know. The Obama deal allowed for inspections, which did take place, and for a while that lasted. Indeed, I was involved through the all-party Iran group in both meetings and visits to the atomic power investigation, the UN agency based in Vienna, and we also went to Iran in a delegation, it was more than 10 years ago now, to encourage them to come to an agreement, and that eventually was the Obama agreement, which, well, not perfect for sure, but at least it and stopped the hostilities. What Iran wants is more than anything to have the sanctions lifted, I think, and I hope that Pakistan is able to achieve that. But what we've got is the most brutal bombardment of Iran and the killing of a lot of civilians in Iran. He thought, Trump, this would lead to an uprising of the Iranian people. Many people are very angry about lots of things and lots of reasons, but the uprising hasn't happened.
You've just given me so much there to think about. I think one way that we could go is one of the biggest cheerleaders for that at the beginning was, say, for example, Kemi Badenoch, people like Nigel Farage. And we know that in the UK there are questions or fears that people have about, say, missile defence. But then on the flip side, there's also a rush to increase the amount of defence spending. And we know that some of the biggest donors to people like the Labour Party, for example, Quadrangle Capital with 4 million, are heavily invested in weapons companies, or with the likes of Reform UK. You have, people who are abroad, like Christopher Harborne, donating tens of millions of pounds and making a good amount of money from the Ministry of Defence contracts. I wondered, how did you think about this seemingly push towards war, whether it's from Putin, whether it's from Trump, and how, people-based movements can try and arrest that flow, considering your long history in those struggles?
Terrifying. Think about the issues our face in the world at the moment. Number one, environmental destruction. Loss of biodiversity, loss of habitat, foul air, global warming, weather pattern changes, and so on. Second, refugees created by war, by environmental disaster, human rights abuse. Third, inequality baked into the economic thinking of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which have enormous sway over governments all over the world. And fourthly, what's the direction of travel of North American and Western European governments? Increase arms expenditure, increase investment in the military, and global arms expenditure is going to reach $3 trillion this year. Now, this is dressed up by the British government as being an investment. We're investing in all these communities by investing in an arms factory. Hang on a minute. All arms expenditure is public spending. That, you put £100 million into developing for example, a military vehicle or something like that. Okay. That's 100 million you're not putting into housing, not putting into health, not putting into education. And so the direction of travel is one of fundamentally reducing social spending and increasing military spending and the militarization of our society. Just imagine if since a few years back we'd had a British government dedicated towards working with and supporting the UN, properly funding the UN, being an agency for peace around the world, being an agency for development, not cutting overseas aid, not mounting this horrible racist attack against refugees. It'd be a totally different atmosphere. And it's up to the decent thinking left overall in the country to challenge that direction of travel which Starmer and the Labour government have taken us in. Following on basically from exactly what Boris Johnson was doing, and before him Theresa May.
Thinking about the conversation about migrants, refugees, etc., Reform UK have said they want to deport people who've already been granted refugee status. How do you think and feel about it?
It's disgusting. I was just come from a mosque just now, a mosque just up the road on Hornsey Road. A lot of people there today. And I was telling them about the arguments we're having with the government about indefinite leave to remain. Now, you and I had a reasonable school education, and we both think the word indefinite means without end. That's what the dictionary says. It's in the word. The government's saying it's now going to curtail indefinite leave to remain and say to people, you've either got to go on a pathway to citizenship dependent on your income level, dependent on whether you claim benefits or not, depending on our characterisation of your being a good or not good citizen, and you can only bring your family here if you're earning a very large salary. Before that, 10 minutes before that, I was talking to a man who's got 5 children in Pakistan and his wife, and they can't all get here. He's a decent guy, he works very hard, he's done everything he can to support his family. Is it wrong that he wants his family here? Put it another way, if he'd been working for a global corporation with an office, BlackRock or something like that, in the City of London, and he was on a salary of, I don't know, 150, 200,000, something like that.
Yeah.
No problem. House, flat, family, all come. This guy, I don't know what work he does, but I'm pretty sure he's not an investor for BlackRock. And I just felt very, very sorry for this guy. and there are plenty like him. I'll obviously do my best to support the family.
Understood. In terms of like that rhetoric, we've seen increasing polarization in some parts of the streets. Actually, before I get there, I had another question, which was, I think some people describe you as skeptical of the European Union, the free market ideas that it espouses at times, and some of its rhetoric towards, or treatment towards immigrants in terms of Frontex and militarizing borders and whatnot. But in terms of the future, some say that, especially because Brexit has cost the UK so much, that it makes sense for people to go back in. How do you see it? As in, is there a world in which Britain could be working with several other countries, with the UN, with the Commonwealth, or is the future in Europe?
The European Union is a very, very mixed bag. It was set up as, in a sense, an antidote to the Soviet bloc. It was entirely, to begin with, an economic entity. It was the coal and steel community, and then the European Common Market, and so on. It then became a more social Europe, and then it decided to get involved in two things. One was big expansion, and the second was a militarization program. So it's often faced in two different directions. I don't think Britain is going to rejoin the EU, and I don't think the EU would necessarily want Britain to rejoin, and it would be very complicated. However, what I always felt was that there had to be a much better, more coherent relationship with the EU. And so what I had signalled to the EU before the 2019 election was that what I would be looking for is something like a customs agreement with Europe. So we would be able to maintain efficient tariff-free trade between Britain and Europe. And that would indeed solve quite a lot of the issues of cost and bureaucracy that go with trade between Britain and Europe, and also travel between Britain and Europe. Now, some good things have happened. Britain's go back into the Erasmus scheme. We should never have come out of it, and that could have been, we could have stayed in that anyway. The option was always there. That is good. We are still members of the Council of Europe and support the European Convention on Human Rights, even though the British government is trying to undermine it. That's good. I think what we need is a more effective economic and social relationship with Europe. Where I do part company with the current direction of the EU is Ursula von der Leyen's almost obsession with turning it into a Euro version of NATO, building up a huge level of arms expenditure, and now a European investment in European armaments to parallel the United States. Well, Europe should be defensive of its social spending levels, defensive of its welfare systems, because they do keep people by and large out of poverty, not totally, but they have a good effect, and be defensive of its its environmental regulations. But Europe needs to be careful. There's a danger we also export pollution by that. So I want a relationship with Europe. I think rejoining is not going to happen.
In terms of that overlap with environment, one of the other well-loved grey-haired individuals in the UK is David Attenborough, and he's made a lot about overfishing, about the environmental degradation that we see. Right now on the political agenda, it seems to have fallen back. You have Reform UK talking about scrapping net zero. You have, in some sense, what some see as attempts to try and marginalise Ed Miliband, say, in the Labour government, and criticism that they've cut their own spending plans on the environment. We know that we all depend on the environment, that the cost of climate change related disasters is increasing. We know that air pollution, for example, according to the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, kills 30,000 Brits every single year. And you even got, say, populations of some of the insects and pollinators in our communities that make it pretty and beautiful also dying too. How do you think you get that back on the agenda?
Look around us here. There's a tree here just growing up. Now look behind you. See the flowers? Okay. Yeah. Daisies mostly. Lovely. What we've done is persuaded our council to not mow the grass. Not mow the grass until at least June. As far as I'm concerned, they can not mow it for much longer. That has meant that the seed pods that are formed in the very early spring then grow. So we're already seeing better biodiversity. We're already seeing more bees, more insects, more pollination from a very small thing like that. And that is environmental consciousness. What David Attenborough is absolutely right about is that the agenda on the environment, which reached quite a high level of popularity, is now being pushed back on the basis that somehow or other environmental protection damages our living standards. What's going to damage our living standards is when you can't grow the wheat that we need, you can't grow the fruit that we need because we've lost all the insects that do the pollination, so we end up with lower yields, more chemicals in the ground, more leaching of soil, and more environmental destruction and degradation. So I find it deeply distressing when politicians that have always played for the last 3 or 4 elections into the green agenda are now busy walking away from it. I was proud of what we did in the 2019 manifesto, and it was judged by a whole lot of very expert people, the greenest manifesto ever in British politics, and we've got to go back to that. It's not a threat to living standards, it's not a threat to life, it's our very survival. And I'm determined that we will continue on that agenda. And so it does mean you've got to capture the imagination, particularly of the school population and younger generation, which is actually there. They do believe in environment and sustainability. They do want to see something. And where Amber is also right is that the lies that are told about fishing are unbelievable. There is a vast amount of overfishing going on in the world. The 30-30 trajectory, where 30% of the oceans are fishing-free zones by 2030, is a good initiative. The South Atlantic, which is now in the southern part nearest to Antarctica, not fished at all, has meant there's been a big increase in fish and whale populations. But there are grotesque levels of overfishing in the oceans, there's grotesque levels of waste being poured into the oceans, plastic and so on. And so it needs something much stronger than what we've got at the moment. And when the message from the industrial countries is, sorry guys, we've had enough of this environmental stuff, we're now drilling, we're now building, and so on and so on. Well, the next generation and the one after that is not going to thank us.
Thinking of that next generation, obviously you've got student loans, say, on one side, you've got the massive amount of council homes that have been sold off. I think Commonwealth estimated it was £200 billion worth of public wealth that had basically been lost to private hands. And you have war on the agenda too. You have a first past the post system. It almost seems like for some that it's almost overwhelmingly bad. And as somebody who's got a history, you know, there's photos of you protesting apartheid, there's photos of you protesting the Iraq war. For somebody who's been so long in it, what lessons would you give to people who see the world as it is and want to make a difference but feel powerless to do anything?
Embolden people and empower them. You embolden people by bringing them together, you embolden people by that sense of community, and embolden people about that sense of achievement together. You look around here in this estate here, it was council built estate, and some of it is housing association and shared ownership. And we have got this open space area at the middle, which is quite nice. We've got playgrounds and so on with it. Islington, like many other places, a whole lot of council properties were bought under right to buy with huge discounts of £100,000 maximum discount, enormous, or maybe more earlier on in the value point. The council is desperately trying to do 2 things. One is increase the level of council stock, and the other is to deal with the problem of overcrowding and homelessness. They've been buying back properties that were sold under right to buy, which I support in the sense that it's increasing the council housing stock, but it's economic crazy because you're selling a place for maybe less than £100,000. 10 years later, or maybe more, you're buying it back for £400,000 or £500,000 as a flat. So, in a sense, what the council is doing is pouring another £400,000 into the pockets of somebody who was lucky enough to buy it under right to buy, or their family or something, all those years ago. Now, I know why the council does it, because they're desperate to get people into good quality housing. And I kind of agree with that, but as an economic system, it's crazy. So what we need is to end this idea that there has to be a limit on the amount of social housing on a new development. Sadiq Khan is now putting it at 20%. That's ludicrous. If there's a big site available, why not 100%? The post-war Labour government, and indeed the old London County Council of the 1930s, led by a Labour right-winger, Herbert Morrison, They built a shed load of council housing, good quality stuff that's still there. And so it can be done. And people actually, the most secure form of housing is council housing. And around here, we've now got a third of the population living in private rented, and that's pretty normal across London and the big cities. And if you went to any of the agencies around here and said you wanted a flat, so just suppose you wanted to live around here, you'd be very welcome, by the way. Say you wanted to rent a 2-bedroom flat, you'd be paying £2,000 a month at least for it. So you'd end up, what, sharing. Yeah. So you've got sort of people in their 40s and 50s can't get a flat of their own, sharing.
Wow.
Not great.
No, not at all. Just the one last one that I had was my sister wanted me to ask. Obviously, you've done a lot, if you like, campaigning against all sorts of issues, and you've done it for so long. When, in your mind, as in, will there ever be a point that you think, actually, I'm fine now, let me retire to my garden or anything like that? Some people see, for example, what happened with your party, they see the spirit of it, but then they also see, say, Zach Polanski's Green Party, and they wonder, why doesn't Jeremy just naturally migrate over? In other words, what does the future hold for you personally? And in terms of politically as well, in terms of what you've done to usher in and push the political imagination in Overton window. Maybe it's not so much a successor, because that's a bit of a anti-Republican sort of sentiment, but how do you see the future of this movement in the UK and your role in it?
I'm proud to be the MP for this area. I'm very proud of the election result we achieved in 24 when they threw everything at us and all the money in the world at us and it didn't work. We're still here. I want to see a socialist alternative. I want to see a clear socialist party. That's why I was involved in the founding of your party. As you well know, it's had a myriad of problems and difficulties. We're in the midst of the local election campaigns now where we do have a number of YP candidates around the country, but we're also working with independents. So, for example, I've been in Redbridge, I've been in Newham, I've been in Bradford and Southport, so on, all over the country supporting them. And they're broadly on the same agenda, environment and sustainability, good quality housing and so on. Now the Greens are interesting. I obviously know a lot of people in the Greens. I know Polanski quite well and so on, and I'm not hostile to them, but I want them to be a bit more socialist and a bit better on international policies, because I do think the reason I was under most attack as leader of the Labour Party wasn't the domestic agenda I was promoting. They don't like a lot of public ownership. They could kind of live with that. What they couldn't live with was the idea you would have a Prime Minister dedicated to disarmament, peace and investment in social needs of people around the world, rather than pleasing a military establishment that is managing to get, as I said before, $3 trillion a year out of public spending into arms. Well, we could do better than that. And so my work is being the MP. My work is joining in the campaigns. My work is supporting the Palestinian people. And this weekend I'm going to go off to support the victims of nuclear testing and the nuclear arms race when I'm going to the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. And I'll be back next week to continue working, campaigning in the local elections for wonderful independent candidates.
Wonderful.
So life is busy, and why would it not be? Because that's the story of my life. I like being busy anyway.
I see. Oh, it's good too. It's good too.
And you know what? Reform and those racist wretches, they are going to lose.
You heard it here first. Yeah. Thank you,
Oliver.
Oh. Was that gentleman upset who tried to walk in front of the camera?
So that was the interview with Jeremy Corbyn. And in many ways, the moment that we're living in is perhaps best represented by the street I'm on. There's trash right behind, and people right now might feel a little bit down. They might feel like nothing's really working right, and they might feel like things are a little bit rubbish. And I left that interview feeling a little bit hopeful. For whatever people say are his faults or his advantages, this is a man who, if nothing else, is given so much of his life to trying to push forward the issues that affect people in their day-to-day lives. And we know what those are. We know that it's rising levels of crime, antisocial behavior. It is hate crimes on the streets. It's feeling like people are trying to tear us apart, despite the fact that we share so much in common. And it's a cost of living crisis that threatens the very basics of existence that people have taken for granted for generations in some senses, but for others, they've never really even had a taste. But the one key reflection I take away from all of that is this: if we want to make a difference or have any say-so over what happens in this country whatsoever, then we have to work together. We have to organize and mobilize together as human beings, as members of the same family, in order to achieve the results that we want. Otherwise, things will continue to happen to us, to our communities, and to individuals. But we can arrest that change, maybe, just maybe, if we work together. But what do you think? As always, see the caption down below and follow Nova for more.